Welcome to MezFi Meets, a podcast where we bring you conversations from the cutting edge of blockchain, AI, financial services, and property, with interesting people doing amazing things. I'm your host, Jerome the CEO of MezFi. On today's episode, we interview Amanda Wick, the founder of the Association for Women in Cryptocurrency, as well as the author of a new book, The Catalysts, the Accelerating Forces Forging the New World Financial Order. If you enjoy our content, please consider hitting the like button and subscribing to our channel. MezFi is an investment manager in Australia. If you'd like to find out more about us and our products, go to www.mezfi.com. Let's jump in to today's episode. Hey everyone, it's MezFi Meets. Jerome Dadon, the CEO of MezFi, here today with Amanda Wick from the Association of Women in Cryptocurrency. How are you, Amanda?
I'm awesome. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Now, Amanda, you and I met, I think it was about a year ago, at one of Steve Vallis's from APAC,
Blockchain APAC.
Blockchain APAC. Gosh, I should know that. From Blockchain APAC. You came in from America at the time, I think it was, and you're one of the keynote speakers. And I was just blown away by your story, by the Association for Women in Cryptocurrency in general. I just think it's so great. The inclusivity that you guys are pushing for in the space. And so to start off today, I think what I'd like to ask is, how you transitioned from your previous career, because, you've got a very illustrious career in the Department of Justice in the United States, to the Association for Women in Cryptocurrency, and maybe a bit about how you found out about crypto in the first place and got into the space.
Yeah, I wish I could say it was intentional, but was totally accidental and serendipitous. So I was running a financial crime task force that investigated all kinds of financial crime, but mostly with a focus on money laundering. And one day, one of my agents came in and said, this was probably about 2013. And he said, do you know what a Bitcoin is? And I said, that's not a real thing. And he said, no, it is. You're going to need to Google it because I think we've got a guy laundering a lot of it. And sure enough, we had a very entrepreneurial fellow who found a market gap on the dark web. You had a lot of, dope dealers who needed to exchange crypto for cash and a lot of users who needed to exchange cash for crypto. And this entrepreneurial fellow just stepped right into the mix to provide that missing service. And so it was kind of weird. And it was an amazing case, lasted for several years. It was probably one of the most fun of my career. And I learned a lot about the technology and how to trace it and dealing with blockchain analytics tools. And then I did that for about 7 more years. And then I was actually detailing at FinCEN, which is the financial intelligence unit in Treasury in the US, and doing really cool policy work on human trafficking and crypto. And a friend of mine said, Chainalysis posted their chief of legal affairs position. And this was the software that we use to trace funds. So I was familiar with it. And so I applied, got the job, went into the private sector for the first time in nearly a decade, and was immediately blasted by where did all the women go? Because it was such a weird thing, because when I was in the US government, so many of the leading crypto prosecutors, crypto agents, lots of women. The analysts, if you read Tracers in the Dark, some of the most important can't talk about what they did because they were still in the government. Amazing tracers who did critical work, women. The DEA analyst, woman. And we were all really spoiled hanging out together. Got to Chainalysis, looked around at tech, and just was like, what the heck just happened? And so Chainalysis was supportive. We started a speaker series called Women in Crypto, where we were just featuring different women and having networking events online afterwards, because this was 2020, so kind of still coming out of COVID, everything was still virtual. And I think our first event, we had maybe 1,300 registrants, women from all around the world. Yeah, it was really incredible. And I wanted to change it. I wanted to turn it into a nonprofit. And I remember my boss at Chain saying, well, we're a for-profit. So we were trying to figure that out. And then I left and went to the government. The situation kind of resolved itself. And then I turned it into a nonprofit. And it's been an absolutely incredible journey ever since.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, so yeah, look,
There
I've
was so
been
much in there. I crammed it all in.
no. You did a great job. I was in I was in financial services early in my career. Between that, it was a lot of coffee, entrepreneurialism, and then back to financial services. But even I noticed that back then, financial services in general is obviously a massive boys' club, and I can only imagine coming into tech in general and crypto back then, Chainalysis. I mean, now I feel like Chainalysis is probably in a better position now than it would have been back then. I don't know. Is that the case? Is it
I think
more inclusive now, or
I think it depends on who you talk to. I've seen some stats about like the number of women on their board, which is always a good measure. It's not the only thing. Whether there's been improvement on the issues that were there, unclear. I will say I just think that the problem is representative of the problem at a lot of companies in tech. And since a lot of folks from tech moved over and started crypto companies, they kind of brought bad habits with them.
yep,
And so you just kind of see it quite a bit. I mean, and it's things that you just wouldn't necessarily think of. And sometimes it's just because you've worked with so many men that you don't necessarily think about the people that aren't working with you or that you're not used to working with.
yep,
And so I think, you can see some CEOs who make a really concentrated effort. And this is actually something that we're working on. We're building a corporate certification program to talk about, do you have anti-harassment policies? Do you have workplace flexibility? Are you doing the things that actually improve inclusion, or are you just pink washing and buying cupcakes on International Women's Day, which is unfortunate where some companies are, but I'd like to think that many of them are moving off of that. Um, we have a real problem in the United States with kind of how we talk about that. And I'm sure you've seen articles about the DEI attack. I just did a post about it. But I talk about inclusion
mm,
just because the only way we get to equality is through intentional inclusion.
yep,
And that's something that we're really focused on. But I see a number of CEOs. We have, I think, over 20 sponsors in less than 2 years. So there are definitely companies and let's be clear, we launched in October 2022, a month before FTX.
wow,
So right before crypto winter, we launched a nonprofit. And even through all of that, we were able to get 20 sponsors. And when you look at companies like TRM Labs, when you look at companies like Ripple, BDO, Norton Rose Fulbright, and focusing on like the crypto industry, like when you look at TRM Labs, Ripple, and some of the other folks that have been with us through a bear market, I did have some folks who said, call us when the bull market comes, and I'm calling. I'm calling them now.
so you
Um,
should.
but God bless the ones who kind of said, even during hard times, this is important. And Ari Redboard at TRM Labs was one of my earliest supporters. Glenn Pomerantz at BDO, Seth Ducharme at Bracewell. A number of men stepped up to help us. And I really think that's why, we've had male allies from the jump. We've never been a women-only association. We've never been a women-only event. It's very inclusive. I don't think you can do inclusion through exclusion. And our male allies are some of our most militant, especially girl dads. God bless girl dads.
God bless girl dads. I'm a girl dad, actually.
I,
Or actually, a boy and two girls, but still, I would call myself a girl dad. Let's talk a bit then about that, and what you said about intentional inclusivity, because and I told you just before the podcast that Steve Vallis, who I know is a male ally, is he on the board
he
of the
is, yes.
association?
He
Amazing.
was he was one of my earliest advisors, mentors, supporters. He's been incredible.
He's so great, and I think I mentioned before. I mentioned before the podcast that as I, because I'm a relatively new podcaster, and as I was building up my episodes, I unintentionally had only interviewed men, and I went to Steve and I asked him about, would he be on the podcast, and he will be in the future, of course. And then he said, make sure you get some women on first, and it didn't even occur to me, and I know that this is something that's close to your heart in terms of intentional inclusivity. And I'll be honest, I'd always thought about unconscious bias, and I thought it was a bit of BS, to be honest with you. But that actually hit me when that happened. I was like, wait a second, I'm actually doing this, and I've got lots of professional contacts, female professional contacts in the industry. We work together with a lot of women. But for some reason, unconsciously, again, I just had only interviewed men. So why don't you talk a bit about intentional inclusivity and how, how you think it's so important.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think you touched on something that's huge, which is there's a reason why it's called unconscious bias and not intentional asshole bias. And I think people really think that there's somehow that they're doing something wrong because they're doing something unconsciously. I think partially people really people love to think that they have free will and they're independent free spirits and we're all special snowflakes, but the reality is have very little if any free will. In fact, science has come out that's pretty good that says we likely have no free will. We are at the humanity level, we are just we have so much data now that shows that we're almost predictable at a certain level. And so I just think people are being a little too hard on themselves when and I think they get defensive. To your point, they think it's BS because they want to think like, I don't do anything wrong, I'm not racist, I've got women friends, I've got black friends. Like I'm that's not me. And I just want to be like, if you're human and you've been living in society and not in a camper van alone, secluded off the grid in the woods, odds are pretty good you have unconscious bias if you've lived in any culture or community on the planet Earth for the last 60 years.
Sure.
And especially if it's longer than 50 years, you got some bias. I tease my dad about this all the time because I'm like, oh, old white man, I love you. Let's talk. Let's have the talk. And he's super open to it, which I appreciate because I think when it comes from somebody you love, right, and it's not a place of accusation. I don't think my dad is a misogynist or a racist or any of the horrible, like the things that indicate intentionality.
Yep.
He's a 70-year-old white man who grew up in the most privileged country in the world. Homeboy's gonna have some bias, right? Like,
for sure.
That's just how it works. And so we have all these amazing conversations and we slowly kind of pick at it. And I think that's the thing, is you really have to look at it. You really have to sit in the discomfort of what is your bias? For me, it's ageism. I know I've seen it. I have felt it. I've met some absolutely incredibly young, especially women, young, talented women that I work with. And the minute that they want to apply for a job, there's always this inclination of older senior women to say, well, you're not qualified enough and you don't have enough experience.
Yep.
But really what that is them thinking, because I took longer and I wasn't qualified enough. But if you look at digitally native kids, they're learning technology at 2. They're winning like the Excel awards by 5, right?
That's incredible.
They have an advantage. They're going to learn faster. That's literally what we're fighting for. So sometimes I struggle with senior women, senior men, right? Where it's like, we want them to be better, and they are, which means they're going to be qualified faster. They're not going to have to pay as many dues in the same kind of ways as we did. It's different. And you want it to be different. You want progress faster. And so, I think it's just really hard for people. And to your other point, I think people don't understand what intentional inclusion is. And I always tell people, if I said, Jerome, I'm coming to Sydney, I want you to throw a dinner party, invite 6 people. I'll be there tomorrow night.
Yep.
Would you invite 6 strangers that you've never met before?
Certainly not. No.
You don't want people to embarrass you. You don't know their track record. What if they steal the silverware, right? There's all kinds of things.
All kinds of things.
You invite 6 people that you know. And this is the thing, right? It's not that it's a boys club that keeps everybody out. It's just that it's so easy and fast to just ask your buddies, ask your friends, invite who you know is a known entity as a speaker. And it takes extra effort to reach out and say, who's a new person that I should get to know? Who's a new face I don't know? Who's a qualified woman in the space that I'm just not aware of? Because nobody's saying get unqualified women or get unqualified people of color and give them opportunities they don't deserve. That drives me insane. But there are so many qualified people that aren't being included that I'm just saying, just be intentionally inclusive to qualified people who just aren't being looked at because you don't know them already. So just get to know new people, and we can help with that.
Absolutely. I mean, so how do you help with that? So if obviously there's the one side where you guys, you run events, and I know, there were before the Blockchain APAC event last year in Sydney, you had the event for women
and men.
And men,
anyone, women, and any supportive allies. We're
any male allies,
inclusive to everyone.
Absolutely.
I'm working on that. I'm old enough to remember when it was women and men, and now it's all the things.
Yes, I'm not going to talk about. Let's not talk about that stuff. That's for another
This is
podcast, I
growth.
think.
This is growth for me. I'm so old that I remember when it was just two genders. So
Yeah,
now I'm like, okay, we're women in support of allies, and
yeah,
I'm embracing that. But the truth is we want everybody to feel included,
yeah.
you know, and whether it's trans women or non-binary people, I honestly don't care. In fact, I'm like, bring your dog. Don't bring cats because I'm allergic to cats, and
Okay.
they just shouldn't exist. But everyone, you can bring anything else, and I'm here for it.
I don't have cats, so don't worry about that. I do have two dogs, so they can come. That's good. I'll remember that for next
I
time for sure.
gravitate towards dog people, so this does not surprise me.
One of my dogs, I don't know if you know this, I lived in New York for a year before I got married. My wife and I, now wife and I, and we got our dog who's here sitting under my desk right now. And he came from Alabama to New York. And
No
so
way.
he has a dock tail, which is very unusual for Australia. No dogs have dock tails anymore in Australia, and he barks with a southern accent. It's amazing.
What's a dog tail?
A docked tail, so they
Oh, a docked tail.
a docked tail,
Oh,
yeah. I know
yeah.
it's a bit
Australia
sad.
stopped that because they're all about like humanity and no cruelty and ecotourism and all of the good things. Like
Exactly.
no more
And
cute nubs on the butts of dogs.
that's it, exactly.
What
Um,
breed is he?
he's a schnoodle, a schnauzer poodle.
Those things are almost illegally cute.
They are.
Like it's dangerous to see them on the side of the road because you're driving and you're just kind of like, oh, adorable. Schnoodles. Even the
How is
word
this
schnoodle.
now? People who are listening will say, "How is this related to the Association for Women in Cryptocurrency or blockchain?" It's not, but it's still something good to talk about.
But you know what? Honestly, the world feels a little bit like it's on fire in every country right now.
Absolutely,
So when you get the moment to talk about schnoodles, you should pause and talk about schnoodles.
I
And the
agree.
number of people I know, tell me that you don't have an Instagram account that's just cats, dogs, farmer with cows. Like everybody right now has their go-to, I need to get away from the burning hellscape dumpster fire that is my community slash country slash government slash neighbors slash planet. So
Seriously,
so we're gonna talk about schnoodles.
we can talk about schnoodles, but maybe we should talk about the other stuff too, because there are some hard hitting topics here, which
That's a good lead into the book. I didn't mean to, but
yeah,
like
yeah, no,
your book is about a lot of horrible things. Let's talk about it.
that's a fairly impressive Australian accent, I have to say.
I have been working on it. Steve Alice and Rochelle Cox coach me regularly. And sometimes because I'm friends with Nicole Waka, I told you like the Kiwi blends in and all of a
Yep,
sudden the vowels are very short and it goes up all the time.
yep.
But if I spend too much time with it, I start to sound like that rock guy from the Avengers. And
Taika
so
Waititi, yep,
yes,
yep.
like I love it. But I have to be very careful because I was in Perth and I was in line and I was actually in Exmouth I was flying from Exmouth to Perth and I was in the security line and I said something to the woman in front of me who was from Perth and she goes, "Oh, was that your Australian accent? Let's never do that again."
Oh no.
I got to Cindy and said to Stephen Rochelle, "Have you been lying to me? Is it terrible?" And one of them, I can't remember which, said, "Nah, that's just people from Perth." I was like, okay, I've met lovely people from Perth. Michelle's from Perth, so maybe she can make that joke. But
Yeah,
it
yeah.
just stuck with me, so I'm very careful whenever I do it.
I have to be honest, I have never been to Perth. I'm 39 and I've never been to
No,
Perth once. I've been
you
meaning
have
to
to go.
go.
Western Australia is the most beautiful thing.
Yeah.
It is. It's a combination of every beautiful thing in the world. You've got desert beauty, you've got the beach nearby, and by the way, by Exmouth, you've got Learmont, which has the only place in the world that you can safely, with like ecotourism principles, dive with whale sharks, and it's
Wow.
the most
You
incredible
did
week
that,
of
did
my
you?
life. Yes, it was my bucket list thing, and it was actually I think right before Crypto Assembly. Yeah, it was Crypto Assembly because I had been in Thailand.
Yep.
And when I met Steve, I was in Thailand. We were talking virtually, and I said, "Oh, I can just pop over and visit." He goes, "Pop over, Amanda. You're 9 hours from Australia. You're not going to pop over from Thailand." And I told him our maps are so they lie to us. Like, I've taken pictures around the world of bullshit maps
Yeah.
that smush Australia right by Southeast Asia. So every American thinks that Australia is like right by Southeast Asia, just a quick
It's
flight. It's
yeah.
so
No, it's so far. But that's again. So that's the issue with the 2D versus 3D map, of course. Which we have this 2D map to to
really being generous. It's not just 2D to 3D, it's 3D to 2D, and it's dictated by the Western cultures. Because somehow Europe and North America end up being wildly big, and
yes.
Africa and Southeast Asia end up being smaller. And I had no idea how big Brazil was until I was like
Brazil's
40.
huge. I mean,
It's
what is Brazil's
huge,
the
huge,
second or third largest country in the world? It's massive, huge. Um,
massive.
Australia though it's not as big as it looks on the map. Funnily enough, because it's a 4 hour flight from Melbourne to Perth, which is about as far as you can go east to west. Whereas the States, it's 6 hours, 6.5 hours from New York to LA.
Oh, but because you're going north to south. So,
Oh,
like,
true.
if you
Yeah, true.
actually went horizontally, I think they're
Yeah.
actually pretty close. That's the
Okay.
thing is Australia and continental US is actually, I don't believe, that significantly different. But people don't forget that New York is northeast. LA is actually kind of, so you're diagonaling. But if you were to go from like DC to San
Seattle,
Diego, I
San
think,
Diego. Yeah. It's
or like
probably the same.
maybe LA, I can't
Yeah.
remember. But like if you just went horizontally, I
Yeah.
think it's not that different from Sydney to Perth.
Well, it's a 3 hour time difference between Melbourne and Perth. 2 hours sometimes, I think. Anyway, I
Yeah,
digress.
three same for us. 3 hours New York to California. But it's part of a larger thing, right? In that you have this kind of American centric, American exceptionalism. Our maps show us being really big, and that's actually, I mean, that's actually part of what I talk about in the book because, so much of the world and history since the 40s has been American centric, and now for the first time, especially with digital assets and with everything that's happening in the financial ecosystem, America is lagging behind dangerously quickly. I mean, the articles about our debt crisis, the debt ceiling, like all of these things, and people are like, oh, but it's America. And I have asked multiple Americans, aside from just unmerited, unbridled American exceptionalism, what is your factual basis for not being terrified about what's happening?
Mm,
And they never have a good answer. And we don't have to talk about it, but I spent the last year before I started the association, I worked on the Hill and I saw a lot of how the sausage was made.
yep.
And I thought that was just kind of like a weird detour, go do government service, come back to crypto, and the two have nothing to do with each other, and they have everything to do with each other.
Well, we can talk
Because
about it. I mean, there's obviously. I mean, so you went and you investigated the the um the insurrection. Is that correct?
well, some people call it an insurrection.
Well,
Some people call it a peaceful protest. Some people call it a riot.
yeah.
Um, I think, the funny thing is depending on the word, and unfortunately in America, the words that you use to describe it end up somehow, it's much like what wearing a mask now says
Mm,
about you. These things that we should be able to agree on certain facts,
yeah.
right? But now they've become kind of like political statements. I investigated the attack on the Capitol that happened after a peaceful protest.
Yep.
And my job was to be the lead financial investigator. So all things financial, some of which made it into the final report, some of which didn't. And some of the really important stuff that didn't is kind of what I write about in the book, not because it's didn't get included in the report, because it was really important about preventing the next Jan 6 and also things about especially American society, but truthfully happening in other countries that we're not really talking about, and it's really problematic. And these things are kind of boiling up, bubbling up. And I think last year I was in 13 countries doing like 50 events for the association and other conference and things. And the talking to people in all of those countries gave me an amazing perspective about what's really happening in the world that a lot of people outside of the world are seeing, and then what's happening in the US that people from the outside sometimes aren't being realistic about, and certainly people in the inside of the US aren't being realistic about. And the isolationism that America's had for the last several years, the number of people who don't even have a passport, the number of people who don't get out and kind of see how the rest of the world works, those groups, we have to have a talk about what's really happening and how that's going to impact not just geopolitics, but also what's the new financial world order going to look like when crypto, tribalism, all of this stuff kind of smashes together, and these catalysts basically forge whatever comes next.
It's potentially scary, also potentially exciting. There's obviously both sides of the coin of what may happen. I'm interested because you say that you were part of the team that investigated the financial crimes that were associated with it. From an outside perspective, you wouldn't have even thought that there were any financial crimes. Are you referring to like theft of property, or what kind of things are we talking about?
No, so to be clear, I wasn't investigating financial crimes,
Okay.
because that would have been DOJ investigates crimes. A bunch of us left DOJ and just went to the House, and we were just factual investigators. So we just
Sure.
investigate what happens, and if we stumble on crimes, we refer them to our old shop to say, hey, prosecute this. But we were
Sure.
just, what did we find? And so factually, we were just looking at who funded it. Right.
Okay, I
And so
understand.
one of the wild things that unfortunately didn't make it into the report was it was largely funded by one old woman from Florida. And because of how bad and crappy our campaign finance laws are, she was able to basically do what we call dark money financing, park it at a bunch of groups, and one person was able to pay over $1 million for an event for one candidate, which our laws are supposed
Wow.
to be able to prevent. But our campaign finance laws have eroded to such a degree that it would be very difficult if you weren't conducting an investigation on every single campaign event, which is a problem. It's not supposed to be that way, right? The system was built on you can do these things as long as you report it. And if we have transparency, people could just see and vote. That's not how it works, right? Everything's hidden. Nobody looks. So it ends up being just a complete dumpster fire by both parties,
Yep.
right? Of just tons of violations of campaign finance laws. And that's a problem. And then the other thing I was looking at was that even before the election, but immediately after he lost the election, Trump and the Trump campaign realized that the fundraising technique of telling people that the election was stolen and fundraising off and pumping out all this misinformation was wildly profitable. They had like
Wow.
their 3 biggest fundraising days after the election.
So
And
that.
so in
Mhm.
between the time he loses and January 6th, he raised $250 million with a B to over $250 million by telling people that their money would go to the official election defense fund to overturn the fraud. None of it went to that. Nearly all of it went to his PAC. So he basically defrauded. And we looked at who was giving money, and it's the unemployed, elderly, veterans, like every segment of society that you would not want preyed upon was who they defrauded out of $250 million. And you see,
And
like, some of these people are still lying about this crap, and it's just it's so terrifying. It is so terrifying.
that is terrifying. Well, look, I guess I don't have to ask you what your thoughts are on, if Trump was to win the election that's coming up. I think I feel like potentially you wouldn't like that so much.
No. Actually, you'd be surprised. Like, and I tell people this all the time. I wasn't a political on the
No,
committee,
of course.
right? Like that people think that everyone hired on the committee were these Democrats. Or they didn't even want to know our political views. Like they hired us to be investigators
Yep.
because a lot of people on the Hill, sorry, have no idea how to investigate their ass from their elbow. They brought in professional investigators who were current or former DOJ to leave
Yep.
their jobs and come in and conduct a real fact-based investigation. I know tons of people hate hearing that because they've been pumped with all this crap that we're all hateful, hurtful. Bless them. Like, if that's the echo chamber you're in, that's not what happened. I mean, like, the investigation itself, totally fact-based, not in any way retributional, just finding out what it is.
No, totally.
What made it into the report, that was decided by the politicals. But the
Okay.
investigation itself,
Yep.
just absolutely fact-finding. And the thing is, I think anyone in America that you talk to who's rational and objective, and I emphasize rational and objective, which is hard because people on both sides are being pumped with so much misinformation by the crazies of both parties. But people who are pretty rational, objective, there's a huge swath of moderates in America right now who will tell you that both parties are broken beyond anything that you could possibly imagine. And there is, I mean, I think as a gender rights advocate, that's probably the thing that tips me is the number of people currently that are, and I'm not even talking about Trump, I'm talking about a lot of the conservatives. Some politicians, their staffers have said out loud that their priority for the year is to roll back women's suffrage.
Excuse me?
Hmm. Yeah. Let me say
Well,
that one again,
yeah.
that rolling back women's right to vote is a legislative priority for some conservative Republicans. That's kind of what keeps me from joining the party in
Yeah.
any kind of meaningful way, because I like, presumably, even the sham oligarchy that we call a democracy, I like having my little vote that kind of goes wherever it goes.
Yep.
And when somebody tries to take that away on top of, control over this, then I'm like, what the fuck, right? Like, that's when I tend to be like, okay, I'm not moderate about that, as it
No.
turns out.
It's really hard in this two-party system that both you in America and we in Australia have, although it's not an actual two-party system here, it just happens to be that there's only two parties that, have, the possibility really, realistically, to win. But it is hard because I find myself in a very similar boat, Trump and now his running mate, JD Vance, are pro-crypto, pro blockchain.
They're certainly saying that now, for sure.
Well, JD Vance is a known and historically pro crypto individual. Trump certainly is whatever the populace wants him to be at any given time. That's obvious. But then and Kamala Harris and whoever her running mate ends up being, I'm not sure they would be so pro crypto, and so there's that sort of potential conflict in my mind. And then fiscally, obviously, not obviously, but I'm relatively conservative. But then from a social standpoint, I'm probably more moderate and more liberal in that way. So it's hard to find a one vote. Who do you vote for? It's like,
See,
yeah,
this is the thing, is like, do you know how many people I talk to in the United States who just describe their political views the same way? In fact, statistics have shown that, like, right now, a third party could win because the crazies have dragged both parties so far that the swath that's in the middle that
yeah,
said just what you said. Do I want to, fund social programs enough so that people don't die? Yes, but there's a ton of fraud, waste, and abuse that we need to look at.
exactly.
Do I care who marries who? No, but there's some things, like, I'm sorry, like, I don't think kids should be able to do life-altering surgery before their brains are fully formed, right?
100%
Like,
true.
there's just some rational
Yeah, rational.
things
Yeah,
that we used to have two parties that kind of like, that, yes, they were here, but then, like, in order to get stuff done, they had to compromise. And
yep,
the idea of the two-party system was, yes, you'll have these two sides, and in order to get stuff done, they will have to compromise on certain things. Not everyone can win. Everybody's got to give a little to get.
yep,
And the problem is that all of these systems turned into for profit, who has the most tweets, who can make the most money, like all of these, like, uneducated, intelligence level decreasing piece of crap, not in it for the right reasons.
yep,
I just want the other side to lose. I will literally salt their earth before I let them win anything.
yep,
Nobody envisioned that. And so now these two parties just, like, they just drag everything. And if we don't practically mandate a middle,
yep,
if a third party can't win dragging, and there are, I know in the United States there's movements to drag the Dems more centrist. Most of my Republican friends, they have given up the fight, which I find horrifyingly sad and terrifying.
really.
But, like, yeah, because if you're a rhino, you're basically shamed out. Like, we should just be able to talk about our politics. Look, it's just a view. Like, I may not agree with you, but I
Yep,
love you madly and I respect
yep,
what you're doing, and I don't
totally.
assume you're a horrible, evil person.
Yep,
But, like, we should be able to talk about it and say,
yep,
like, pros and cons. And I think so many countries, I mean, I talk to my friends in the UK, I'm sure you've heard this too. Same horrifying things. Like, there's just this horrible, and that's part of what I talk about in the book, like this rise of tribalism is feeding in, and you see that rise of tribalism in crypto, right? My shitcoin's better than your shitcoin, and and it's just like,
when people's money is on the line, things start to get a bit crazy. Obviously, it just does, and it is globally in this day and age. It sort of seemed like the previous century was sort of this ascent towards a more liberal world more globalized, more accepting, more understanding. And then we've gotten to this, what may have been a peak of sorts. And then it seems like we're coming back down the other side now. And, there are certainly some things that should be walked back very rightly, like what you said before about, forcing or, allowing children to undergo life altering and future altering surgery, before they are at the age of consent, and some other things. But, throwing the baby out with the bathwater is a phrase that comes to mind, I think, for sure.
I think one of the things that's just super scary about it is that I think if you look at all of these countries, this is just my personal theory, it's something that I kind of talk about in the book, is that if you look at all of these cultures, they all have massively widened and increased wealth gaps.
Yeah.
Right? Like in the United States, especially starting in the 70s, this like line just kind of goes like this.
Yeah.
And the gap between the haves and the have-nots is massive. And I don't know about in Australia. I definitely know in the United States, and I think that, people I talk to in the UK, the only way that you prevent the French Revolution of the have-nots rising up against the haves is to convince the have-nots that it's not the haves that are their problem.
No.
It's those other have-nots that have just taken like some of their little pie. Like you could have more pie if you took it from the person who took it from you. Don't look at our giant have pie that we took from not having antitrust law, from horrible capitalistic practices, from all of the. Don't look over here. Look over here.
Yep.
In the number of countries like New Zealand, like the housing crisis in New Zealand, right? Like the cost of property, like the amount of people who can't buy homes in Australia, like the problems are the same.
Australia's crazy. Like the cost of living in Australia far eclipses America now. Like I have people who come to Australia. We used to be a country where, relative to America, things were quite cheap. It's just not the case anymore. In Australia, the housing is so unaffordable. Buying a house in Melbourne, I mean, the average house cost in Melbourne is it's $800,000, $900,000. Sorry, $1 million thereabouts. Sydney, 1.5 million Australian dollars is the median house price. Yeah. So it's crazy. Like it's way, way, way more expensive than the average in the US. In the US, if we were to go and buy a similar sort of home in a capital city in the US, you'd pay a lot less for it.
Well, the part of the problem is we have way more cities, right? Like you guys kind of all live around this strip, which is my plan is to develop the bush. Like I want to go out. I have a friend who lives like an hour outside of Sydney. We talk about it all the time. We're like, let's go. Just mow some down and develop the bush. There's so much out there, right?
There is, yes.
It's just like, oh my gosh, that's wildly
It's also
unfeasible.
desert, though, by the way.
Yes, but hey, there are people who live in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and El Paso, Texas, and it turns out if you make life miserable enough on an East Coast, people move west. So, we just need to start the Go West campaign in Australia.
That is true. That is true.
Like
I mean, look,
600 years later, it could work for you guys the way it worked for us in the U.S.
There's places like, I mean, the Arabian Peninsula. They've got no fresh water at all. They, desalination plants, all that sort of stuff. So, it could work if the need is there for sure.
If we keep talking about this, eventually we're going to end up going back to schnoodles. And I think at the end of my at the end of my book that talks about literally all these catalysts forging the new financial world order and how different and horrible it might be for some people and great for some people, I think at the last page, I'm just going to have a picture of a schnoodle and just say, let us just end with one thing that we can all be happy about. Schnoodle.
I'll send you a picture of Henry, and you can put him there.
His name is Henry. Is he the ninth? Henry the Ninth?
No, he's not Henry the Ninth. He does have a middle name though. Henry Barney. Henry Barney is his name. Yeah.
That's the whitest thing. I gotta send you this clip that this comedian, maybe it was Dave Chappelle.
I've seen it.
Oh my God.
And they point in the audience, and it's like, Coco. It's like,
my dog's name is Linda.
Yeah.
Just like these white people. Stop being white people.
All right. Let me take control of proceedings for a second, and let's be serious here.
Okay.
So let's talk about the book for a second. So what is the name of the book? Firstly,
it is The Catalyst. It's The Catalyst. The accelerating forces that are forging the new world financial order.
Okay. And this has come out the back of your investigations into the riot that was after the peaceful process.
Yeah, that was a piece of it. I will say what it really came out of was kind of like more a decade in US government, seeing what was happening, and then about a year and a half, almost two now, of being in 12 different countries, countless different conversations with global regulators. I mean, I think one of the things that amazed me the most was that when I got out and talked to people off the record and got to meet regulators in foreign countries, they step off the stage, they finish the sound bites, it's off the record, and they all know the exact moment that their country wanted off the US dollar. Do they say it
Wow.
publicly? No. But
Mm-hmm.
behind closed doors, even our allies would admit that there's some policy decision. You know, you might be able to guess some would surprise you, but for every single one of them, there was a moment where the US made some decision where they said, we do not want to be dragged. We do not want to lose autonomy over our policy decisions.
Yeah.
We are an autonomous country and we want autonomy. And the problem is that since 9/11, the weaponization of the dollar and the
Yeah.
dollar system, through sanctions, through all kinds of the ability to, control SWIFT, there's a lot that it presumed that America would wield that power responsibly. And unfortunately, with great power comes great responsibility, and we have not been that responsible with
Interesting.
it. And so it's created a lot of problems. And when you have that many countries wanting to get off the dollar, okay, maybe not a big deal until you create an alternative, because historically people didn't worry about getting off the dollar because there was no fiat currency.
Yeah.
Right? It's not going to become the yuan. It's not going to become the ruble. De-dollarization isn't feasible.
Yep.
But it doesn't have to be de-dollarization. It could just be a reduction in dollar dominance. Say, if a bevy of alternative virtual currencies were invented, and they didn't think about, what if crypto's not a fad? What if it's taken up by millions and billions of people around the world who do remittances, who want faster payment rails, who don't trust their governments? The number of old white men in America who don't understand, who don't even know what a remittance is, right? You try to explain to them the use case of crypto and they're fully banked. They don't understand what underbanked or unbanked is.
No.
So it's a very difficult conversation. And so when you add all these things together, there's just a lot of things. I feel like I was seeing all these things. And you know what it's like? Are you a Marvel fan? Did you ever watch okay, you remember the Thor, I think it was Dark World, where the convergence is going to happen?
The Dark World was, by the way, it was the worst film in the Marvel canon, basically. I mean,
don't disagree. Don't disagree.
But I do remember the convergence, yes.
It did provide a good analogy, which is the convergence, where like everything just happens at the same time. And when all these things like layer on top of each other, something horrible comes through.
Yeah.
And that's essentially what my book is about, is that there are all these horrible things: US political and economic dysfunction, the rise of tribalism, our failure to rein in big tech, and the amount of data that is out there and that's being used to manipulate us. Like, all of these things are layering on top of each other. And you see some phenomenal books that analyze one or two. But I was just like, does anybody see how all of these combining,
these things are coming together? Yeah.
It's kind of like what's her name, Natalie Portman, and she's just running around and nobody will listen to her because you're just a small little girl, and what could I possibly know about the convergence? And I'm like, guys, I just see all these horrible things happening. Can we just for a moment talk about all of them happening at once?
Well, look, I will say though, Amanda, you're probably someone who's a lot more qualified than Natalie Portman in that film was to talk about these kinds of things.
Jerome, she was a PhD.
That is true.
She was like a brilliant physicist. And in real life, I have to tell you, Natalie Portman's actually kind of wicked smart. She's wicked smart.
I certainly know that. I mean, what I mean is, okay, what I meant was, and I probably didn't say this particularly well.
You're gonna dig it deeper, and I'm here for it. Keep digging.
I probably am. Yeah, exactly.
But her hair was so long and straight, and she's so pretty. Can she be like that smart? I'm just gonna say what crypto Twitter would say. Can boobs really talk? Can they really think, though? Like, I don't know. It has a vagina. Can it actually do anything other than cook and raise babies?
You're gonna get me canceled here.
I'm telling you, if you go on crypto Twitter, I'm repeating. I'm not embellishing. It's terrifying.
I actually
Terrifying.
I remember this is something I remember now, and this is a slight divergence. I remember when you were speaking in the first one. I remember the first time I heard you at the not the
Oh,
crypto assembly, it was
no,
the
no,
other one.
digital asset
Digital
conference,
asset,
right?
yeah.
Yeah.
And you were talking about crypto Twitter and what a cesspool it is. And I remember sitting there thinking to myself, but I'm on crypto Twitter, and I actually enjoy myself there, because there are, the problem with Twitter, and we call it's X obviously now. You stay in your own particular cesspool. Like, the things that you look at, the things that you talk about, they end up becoming this echo chamber of your own world. I find that the people that I follow and the things that I talk about, maybe I'm more in NFT Twitter than I am in like proper crypto Twitter, but it's much more positive sort of place, which I'm thankful for, to be honest. So I've sort of avoid a lot of those cesspool conversations.
Oh, look, it's
Um,
like that. It's like our conversation earlier, right? Like the people that are coming to your dinner party
yeah,
are probably not going to like crap on you and say
yeah,
horrible things. And there are sections of crypto Twitter. Remember the guy that came, Anthony something? I don't remember. Is like the ETH
yeah.
guy.
The ETH guy, yeah.
Super lovely, right? And I
Super
can never
lovely guy,
remember
yeah.
his name, but just super lovely. And I remember talking with him about it. And, the ETH community tries to be really inclusive and they're trying to build a better world. And there's
Yep.
so much about what they're doing that is absolutely beautiful that you're like,
Look,
oh my goodness.
I will
But
say, look, I think it's Bitcoin maxis. Let's just put it out there. Bitcoin maxis are the problem.
no, I mean, don't get me wrong. It's an interesting viewpoint, but I will tell you, to me, it's the number go up crowd. It's
Mm.
the speculative shitcoin,
Yeah,
like
yeah,
all
yeah,
about the pump and dump. That's the culture. And the funny thing is you'll see men post it's fine, right? And like sometimes you'll see like men that are kind of crypto LinkedIn venture into crypto Twitter and they'll get some crap posts that's like, you don't know what you're talking about, like blah blah blah. But go just look at some of the women in the
yeah,
crypto community. And I swear to you, some of the most brilliant women in crypto, CEOs of companies that post something, the misogyny that is
yeah,
in the comments. And I think the thing is the algorithm doesn't surface that for you guys.
yeah,
Why would you see that, right?
yeah,
Unless you're like hunting it out. But I'm telling you, I've had some girl dads just run an experiment, start following some women on crypto Twitter, and they are absolutely horrified because if
yeah.
their daughter was the CEO of a company and posted something intelligent and innocuous and got blasted by the absolutely horrible stuff. And
Terrible.
we just need men in crypto, especially
Mm.
crypto Twitter, to call that shit out, like
Yeah,
shut it down. And
totally.
there's some wonderful men that are doing that, and we see it. Like I saw a post the other day, a guy posted about having to shut it down, and God bless him because like it can't be women, it has to be the men. We need the men. We
Yep,
need the men.
yep, yep. Well, I'm happy to get on board and start supporting in any way I can. Obviously.
Oh, you're
Um,
doing this. Thank you.
yeah.
You let me wear my Unmantle Your Panel sweatshirt, which is about our big initiative that's
Unmantle
growing
your
even
panel.
bigger. Yeah.
And you can iterate that though. Unmantle your panel, unmantle your your board, un something your board. I'm not very good with alliteration right now, but
Workshop that.
yeah,
Workshop
yeah, exactly.
figure out what undo yeah, it's
Yeah, so
hard.
whatever it is, I
This
like it.
this was such a gem. We kept
Yeah,
it, but we got to keep working on more. Yeah.
love
Yeah,
it,
yeah.
love it. So okay, so where we're at with the book. So do you see, and I guess the question is, are there any conclusions in the end from your journey through, excuse me, through these different factors that are potentially converging? Is there a conclusion that you come to where you think to yourself, is there an antidote to this, or is it just doom and gloom and we don't know what's going
No,
on?
it's not doom and gloom. We have some case studies in the book looking at some specific countries and what they're working on and the directions that they could go in, because there's a number of countries that are on the cusp. I would put Australia in this category. Historically, Australia has tended to follow and wait to see what the UK and the US have done,
Always.
and that would be a mistake, especially if they wait for the United States. The UK might move a little bit faster because of Mika in Europe, and they're having this second mover kind of query whether it's an advantage. And if the UK moves and then Australia moves, maybe it has a shot. But but basically at the end, it's kind of like gaming out, like if this happens, like what could happen. I don't think all is determined, partially because I think people can have more of a role in this than they think.
Yeah.
I mean, 1 out of 4 Australians owns crypto.
Wow.
If
That's a lot.
they wrote to their MPs, right?
MPs. Good job.
Yeah. If they wrote to their MPs and said, look, I care about this. This isn't about my favorite crap coin. This is about the future of digital finance. I
Yeah.
think a lot of MPs, a lot of representatives, a lot of senators, a lot of government people are really behind. And they think that crypto is crypto, and they don't realize that crypto is Napster.
Yeah.
And we might be at the Kazaa LimeWire stage, but whatever the Apple Music, Spotify looks like, it's going to be the governments that acknowledge that CDs are done, and you better create a framework for digital money the way that you did for digital file sharing.
Let's hope that it doesn't end up being Spotify, Apple Music, though, because that's just terrible for the people who are actually making the music. Like that's the worst thing that's ever happened, basically.
Well, and this goes back to how long will the have-nots of the world just sit and let the have shit on them?
Yeah.
And in most democracies around the world, the sad answer is they've sat and gotten shit on quite a bit because they have bought into this bullshit of it's not the haves who have ruined your lives. It's these other women, color, people of color, LGBTQ. It's all these other have-nots and these others that have ruined your life.
Yeah.
And if people could get past that, if people could really see in how many countries the haves have systemically put into place everything to prevent the have-nots from being able to get what they have.
Yeah.
It's, I mean, even down to, could a new musician make money the way that U2 or Metallica can? No.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And that's a blight on, that's a blight on what happened out the back of Napster. I mean, like it's not a music podcast, but, I was talking to someone actually. So my good friend, Justin Meller, who lives in LA, he's moving to New York. He's Australian, and so the podcast episode that's out right now is with him, and he's an incredible digital artist, and he is so upset and worried about what's happening with AI in relation to illustration, drawing, art. Because, and I'd be interested to get your take on this because I didn't even think about it. Again, unconscious bias. And I asked him, what do you think about AI with artwork? And he said, you can say whatever you want. People can say, oh yeah, we'll choose artists over AI because, there's a human touch and blah, blah, blah. But at the end of the day, what we can't get past is the fact that these AI tools have been trained unknowingly, without consent, on all of these artists' life work, and then it's producing art out the back of that to replace an artist and what they're doing. And that's just so wrong and at a level. And that's why I was talking about Napster, because when he said this to me, I was like, I hadn't even thought about it, number one, which is horrendous. And then number two, I thought, this is like Napster. This is like where they're bringing a class action against the giant. But like, let's hope that it doesn't get to Spotify where, artists sort of win, but then they lose ultimately.
You've just kind of summed up, I think, every fear. I mean, my brother is actually a graphic novelist, and I was talking to him because like he writes and then he has like an illustrator who draws, right? And I said, couldn't you just use AI for the images? And he said, it is not done in this industry. It is, you just don't do it because it's so disrespectful to a human's work that it's like a cultural, basically kind of like a cultural patrol. And the beauty of that is something quite amazing. And that kernel of, we know it's wrong. We know it's wrong to take what's essentially going to be somebody else's artwork and you're going to feed it into an AI machine. You're going to feed thousands of them in, and then you're going to say, build me a picture of this thing. And it's just going to bastardize a bunch of people's work, not give them any credit. And it's going to spit things out. And, you see regulation in the EU, of course, first. No, UK, I think. One of the two, to try to have ethics in AI. And part of the problem is that capitalism is usually so far behind.
Always.
So far behind. And when you think about how people, and I hate to use this, well, I won't use that word. They are going to just be taken advantage of terribly.
Yep.
And the gap between the haves and the have-nots is going to get even wider
Yep.
because people doing anything of value, it's just going to get fed into this machine. And all these people are going to be like, well, I'll just use AI. I don't have to pay a graphic designer. I don't have to pay a songwriter. I don't have to pay any of these people.
Yep.
And what will those be? I mean, people are like, oh, well, they'll just find new jobs. They'll just find things that AI can't replace. And I'm like, that's so easy to say as somebody with a, solid income and a full padded retirement account. And the only people I know who are saying that shit are the haves.
Yeah, totally.
I just don't know anyone who's actually worried about buying a house, paying for a family, affording life for the next 10 years, who's not terrified. I mean, I have a friend in Brazil, and her 18-year-old daughter was just sobbing, like crying, thinking about, what am I going to do that's not going to be replaced by AI?
Yeah.
What's the world that I'm going to live in that's not a horrible hellscape, right?
Yeah, so let me ask you this then. So because obviously you've got the Elon Musks of the world, and I don't know if it was the CEO of OpenAI. I can't remember his name right now. Sam Altman.
Sam, yeah.
Yeah. So
I
they were
almost
talking
said a
about
different Sam, and I was like, we got rid of that one. Now we got a new Sam. Oh.
Over in DOJ world, that would have been a real coup getting him. So universal basic income. So that's something that people tout as the answer to AI taking jobs. And it may be, in a sense, giving people a universal basic income that sort of compensates for AI having taken jobs. But what it doesn't compensate is AI having taken purpose.
Yes, and it also, how are you going to do that? How are you going to do a UBI? Are you going to do it based on children? Are you going to do it on a family based of 2? Because I will tell you, I don't want to pay for a family based on 6. Everyone I know who has more than 2 children, I literally want to say, are you paying attention to the world right now that you created that many mouths? Because you better be able to feed them. Because bless your heart, that third one almost came after you and was like, pick the 2 that you like, because like, just. And I'm being hyperbolic, obviously, but somebody I was talking to the other day said, they had 6 kids, and I was like, were they born in 1940? Were they born before 1970? Because at a certain point, the sheer data of what's happening, if you're bringing that many mouths into the world, do you have a good plan to feed them? And if not, who do you think is going to feed them?
Yeah.
In fact, I remember seeing this bumper sticker when I was younger. I forget, I think I was in Florida. And it said, if you can't feed them, don't breed them. And I remember when I was younger, and my dad loves to tell this joke. Well, it's not a joke. He has this saying, everybody's a Democrat until they get their first job. And I remember when I was younger and I saw that bumper sticker and I was so offended. And I was like, that is so inappropriate. And I will tell you, then I got to a certain age and paid enough taxes that I was like, but is it inappropriate?
But
right? And this is the problem, is that there's just, you get to a point where the reality of, to your point earlier, limited water, limited resources, climate change, the inevitable climate wars, the inevitable climate refugees, like the reality of what's going to happen, really, you're going to do that with 6 kids, and then you're going to want UBI to cover those 6 kids?
Yeah.
Because UBI is going to be UBI, and if you're feeding 2, great. If you're feeding 6, I hope the 6 eat the amount of 2. Not because I don't know that a population of desperate people are going to keep empathy at that level. That's the problem, right? To your point, you take away people's purpose, you take away their jobs, you give them UBI, you reduce them to being dependent on the state, which most people loathe the idea of. I couldn't bring myself to apply for unemployment when I got fired once because so much communal, like societal shame on being a welfare recipient. I was just like, even though I had paid into that system, right? And this is the problem. The idea that we're suddenly all going to just turn around and in the moments of darkness and humanity become super empathetic to the needs of people whose lives have been ruined by AI. You really think that's the way it's going to go?
Don't think so.
I just don't. That's just humanity hasn't stepped up and played that role. Humanity tends to trend to the bottom, not the top.
It's true. It's very Orwellian, isn't it? You know, I think about George Orwell and 1984, and you know all of that, and thinking about AI. It definitely seems like that's the direction that it's sort of steering us in. There's definitely look, and to what we've talked about along the way about inclusivity and you know, equality and all of these things. I think there's the most important thing is, and you are clearly someone who approaches these topics with the kind of tact that you need to be able to get through those walls that we were talking about before, where people get their back up. You know, they say start prickling. It's like, are you offending me? You're obviously, and maybe it comes with you know, experience. You know, I think younger people who start talking about these things come off as a judgmental, accusatory, you know, sometimes. You know, but I think you definitely come at it with a real tact. But I think, you know, how is it, and how is it that we're going to be able to get these inclusivity things, be able to you know, take into account all of these AI problems, and then do it in a way that doesn't actually you know, promote groupthink, you know, George Orwell style, you know, everybody has to think the same, you know, losing individualism. How do we do that?
I feel like I mean, this would be the greatest end of the book, but it's also kind of like the most rah-rah optimistic.
Yeah.
Um, and it's a really tough question. I mean, I was smiling, like thinking about something while you were talking about this Instagram video I saw where this American woman is speaking to a French woman
Yeah.
about how terrible the working conditions are in America. And the French woman says, you know what you need to do? You need to get a group of people together and go shit in the river and then kill all your leaders, and boom, you'd get workers' rights. And I was like, maybe it's just that easy. We all need to just like band together, go shit in the river, kill all our leaders, and advocate for workers' rights. Revolution, right? Like, but aside from that, it's a really tough question. But I look around and it feels like something's got to give, or it's going to get really bad. And I think of this movie Elysium. I don't know if you ever
I
saw.
didn't see it, but I know about it. Yeah.
It's an amazing movie. Matt Damon, Jodie Foster. I think it's like 10 or 15 years old now. And if you watch it, it doesn't seem so. There's a lot of movies that now don't seem so far-fetched. Like if you
No.
watch Idiocracy, can't watch it. Don't laugh. Don't think it's funny. Feels prophetic. If you watch Don't Look Up, a movie that they meant to be about climate change and then eerily became far more prescient than they could have intended. Like
Yeah.
whenever Hollywood does, let's just worst case scenario plan. And if you go back and watch The West Wing, which was written, I think, like a decade before things got bad, if
Yeah.
you go back and watch The West Wing from the beginning, the things that show called just dramatically game planning horrible worst case scenarios that would never happen, boom,
Yeah.
nearly all of them have happened. And I tell people all the time, one of the biggest failings of humans is a refusal to acknowledge our like deepest, darkest, worst failings that all of us have.
Yeah.
And so they don't worst case scenario plan because they can never imagine the worst. I think a lot of us in law enforcement who are prosecutors, who are law enforcement agents, we see the worst of humanity. Like we see truly horrible things done every day.
Yeah.
And so we are actually very capable of imagining a worst case scenario. And I see this a lot with builders in the crypto Web3 space, where you have all these wonderful tech founders and these people who are like, look at this amazing thing that I built. And I'm like, have you thought about if somebody used it to do this, 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 and this? And they're like, oh my
Ooh.
God.
Wow. Okay.
And I'm like, so this is how Pandora created her box.
Yeah.
Because she didn't think about if somebody ever opened it.
Yeah.
And it's not that they build bad things. It's that they don't picture bad enough people to use their beautiful thing in the most horrible ways. And it's not that they shouldn't build it. I wish that I could get in front of more builders and founders at the beginning just to say, let's do a little worst case scenario planning, because maybe you'd build it slightly differently and maybe you'd tweak some things. Maybe you'd put in some fail safes.
Yeah.
Maybe you would just design it a little bit more cautiously if you too could see the horrors of humanity that some of us have seen. And we just need to get like builders and founders together with those of us who have seen the worst of the worst and say, let's just sit in a room. And some companies do this. It's called compliant design,
Yep.
where they'll sit and kind of talk about, okay, let's get security and lawyers and all the non-fund people in with the fund people
Yep.
and talk about what should we build and how should we build it. But a lot of times you're starting a company, there's two of you in your mom's basement, nobody can afford a lawyer, or the lawyer that you can afford is affordable for a reason.
Yeah.
And you might not get that great of advice. And before you know it, you're building a thing, you've launched it out into the world, and you didn't think at all about how it would be used.
Can I ask, is there any particular technology, business use case that you have in mind when you're discussing these kinds of things? Like, is there something that you know about that this happened with that you think to tell, apart from AI, obviously?
So I remember being at a government conference like in 2017 or 18, and it was an illicit threat finance conference. And somebody asked one of like the really wicked smart crypto people at one of the agencies, like, what's the thing that you're most terrified of? Now, this was back in, I'm going to say 18. Yeah, around 18.
Yep.
And he said, decentralized exchanges.
Wow. Okay.
And this was, I mean, he said, if you think about the concept of a decentralized exchange, something that's exchanging possibly crypto for fiat or crypto for crypto with no AML, KYC, not even attempting to do any diligence on who's moving that money or where it's being moved to or what it's being used for, it's terrifying. And there are a lot of people, I know we talked about this before the show, who would love to pretend that the FI in DeFi does not mean financial services and that they're not entering the most highly regulated space in the world.
Yep.
And it's regulated that way for a reason. Because me sending you information, me contacting you on WhatsApp, me sending you a digital file, that is different than me sending you money.
Mm.
And the idea that, I tell people all the time, of course, the inventors of Bitcoin were anonymous because those assholes knew exactly what they were doing when they launched disintermediated finance and gave individuals the ability to move a infinite amount of value instantly for pennies on the dollar globally with nobody knowing.
Mm.
That was people don't realize that was a pivotal moment in history, that someday when they open the time capsule and the next race of aliens is looking at this dead planet saying, what happened to humanity? What were the things? And it's like, oh, look, they invented AI. Oh, look, they invented disintermediated finance. Like, oh, look, here's the moments in time.
Nexus,
people don't get that disintermediated finance, that moment. Like, God bless the Maxis. The thing that they're not wrong about is that the invention of Bitcoin was 100% one of the most pivotal moments in history.
Yep.
Not because Bitcoin is so great, but because it created completely disintermediated finance. That was the only piece that was missing when you think about globalization. We could communicate, we could send files, we could do everything, but we could not send money anonymously, instantly to anyone we wanted.
Yep. Well, I mean, the interesting thing about that is that it really is just the digital version of having cash in your pocket and going and passing it over to someone, isn't it? Which we hadn't invented before.
Not only that we hadn't invented, but in some ways for a reason. Because have you ever seen like pallets of cash?
They're big, yes.
Not only are they big, they're disgusting. Like they get dirty very quickly because it's like fabric and they stink and it's like very difficult to move. Like it is not a mechanism that's conducive to scaling.
No.
And it sure as shit doesn't move fast. Like if you're trying to move lots of cash and you got to feed it into the system, moving it on a pallet, like there's a reason why we didn't really worry. And we just had a form. It's like, well, if you're doing more than 10K, I want to know, but otherwise, right?
Otherwise, whatever. Yeah.
Do you like that doesn't exist for crypto? And the thing is it's not that crypto is bad. It's that there were certain gaps and there were certain aspects of money that were very conducive to criminality. And crypto kind of said, ooh, let's make it really fast, make it really portable, make it anonymous. Let's do all these things. And you know who really loves these things?
Yeah, criminals for sure.
Well, no, they weren't thinking criminals. They were thinking businesses.
Yeah.
People who are paying high fees. Because
Yeah.
what they weren't thinking about was some guy who would come along and say, oh, let me start a darknet marketplace.
Yeah.
Now that we have this perfect criminal money,
Yeah.
I guarantee you that the founders of Bitcoin were not sitting there thinking, and then the next thing we're going to invent is Silk Road.
No,
That
certainly
is
not.
not what they were thinking.
Certainly not. But that is
That's
what
what
happens.
happens, right?
Yeah.
And so that's the problem with all of this tech. These people create something that is inherently, it's neither good nor bad. It is
Yeah.
tech.
Yeah.
And then good people do really good things. And I hate to reduce it to this because I don't think there's good and bad people. I think there's like just bad choices. But some people make really good choices with tech. And then some people make some really bad choices with tech.
100%.
And if we don't patrol against the bad, I hate to say it, it's just so easy to do the bad over the good.
Yeah.
And
That's true. No, that's true. That's true. I was as you were speaking, I was thinking about something. I've kind of lost it now, but it's just such an overwhelming discussion to think about. To be honest, with remittances, what was I thinking about? DeFi, the finance in DeFi.
the whole cluster of what do we do?
Yeah. I mean, look, because with MezFi, the reason that I started MezFi, and it's a 2-year journey so far, and the main thing that's been a struggle is regulation. So, I've got I'm onto my third license company, and now, we're going to be launching with them. They're very reputable. It's really great, but we've struggled to get compliant. Not necessarily in the way that most crypto companies do, because we're not a crypto company; it's a fund. So we're natively AML, KYC compliant and all those things. But when I saw what happened with Celsius and these kinds of DeFi protocols that fundamentally ended up being just a Bernie Madoff light, we'll say. It sort of occurred to me that there's a gap, and what's needed is compliant DeFi. And so even though it's not DeFi what I'm doing, but the AML, the KYC, all of these things come into it because, like you very rightly said, DeFi, you can't ignore the fi in DeFi. And so you have to start, thinking about it, I think, and coming at it from a compliance first mindset. And that's what we're doing. And I think there needs to be more of that. And there's a number of actors that do that, and do it very well, obviously.
I will say I 100% agree, but I also think the regulators need to take a little responsibility, especially now. A decade ago, I would have said it was a little bit different, but now you have some really good actors that are trying to do it right, and you have some really bad actors that are doing it badly.
Yep.
And both camps the industry needs to be better about calling out the bad actors.
Yep.
Everybody knew Binance was a transnational money laundering organization and nobody was saying it.
True.
That was infuriating to those of us in the government who were watching a transnational money laundering organization operate for years.
Yep.
The good ones have to call out the bad ones. The Brian Armstrongs of the world can't sit there and pretend that CZ is a compatriot. That's like you running a business and sitting next to a drug cartel lord and be like, well, we both have that entrepreneurial spirit, don't we?
Oh, God.
No, right?
Yeah.
You have to call out the bad ones in the industry, to maintain credibility.
Yep.
And crypto has got to get better at that because
Yep.
you've got BTC markets, CoinSpot, what's the one in New Zealand that Janine runs? You've got these like easy crypto.
Yeah, I think so.
You've got these exchanges that are trying to do it right?
Yep.
They do things not because they have to, but because they should. They care about their customers. They care about doing it right.
Yep.
And the good actors need to call out the ones that aren't doing it right. And the regulators need to look at the ones that are really, really trying. And instead of going after maybe who looks like a nice, big, fat, juicy fine, go after the ones that aren't even trying.
Yep.
Like going after a program that's insufficient AML when there's folks that have no AML, that's egregious. And so we have to look at both of these camps and say we all have to do better. Crypto, you need to self-regulate and call out your bad actors, and regulators, there's plenty of bad actors for you to go after before you start going after the ones that may not be perfect but are trying. And right now, that's better than some banks. So like let's acknowledge AML has always been a bit of a junk, like a crapshoot, like box checking exercise. You can do it in crypto in ways that banks can't.
Well,
And the ones that are trying, like for God's sakes, like it just is such a it's just such a not what we're supposed to. We shouldn't. There's a great book, The Chicken Shit Club, about why the DOJ didn't prosecute people responsible in the financial crisis. And the gist of it is because the incentives are to grab the ones you can win, not
yep.
fight the fights that need to be fought. And that's a problem.
And so the incentives are. I'm repeating this because I want the wisdom is definitely important. The incentives are to fight the fights that you can win, not to actually go after the real bad actors. That's what you're saying. And when you say incentives, you mean you can get the money from those ones that you can win. You're not necessarily going to get cash from these ones that you need to prosecute. I get you. It's tough, isn't it? I mean, there's so many problems inherent in all of these things that we're not going to solve here today, obviously.
But they are solvable.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of good people in the industry. I'm talking with one of them, which I'm very excited about. And I think that if we keep having these conversations, when I think of the conversations that Steve organizes at Digital Assets Conference, at Crypto Assembly, when I think of the beautiful crypto community that's in Australia, and y'all can get everybody in a room and actually figure this out. And when I think of that, like, I think that's the thing that I envy about Australia is the ability to actually be able to get everybody in one room and figure it out. For as big as you are, you're not so big in terms of the number of people who are looking at this, and you're like a microcosm of the possible. And Australia could do incredible things if it could just ignore the UK and the US and say what's best for Australia. And let's just focus on what's best for Australia, and let's make a system that reflects our payments, that reflects our people, that reflects our culture. And man, you guys could do awesome things, but you need political will, which means that people in Australia, you 1 out of 4 crypto owners, you need to call your MPs and say, I want better. I want innovation. Like, I want Australia to be a leader, not a follower.
Yeah, well, I mean, in Australia, you may not know this about us, but we are professional whiners, professional whingers. You know, we love whinging, we love complaining about stuff. But we could take a lot out of America's book because American people, I know, are they speak up and they actually push for the things, and sometimes to an extreme and to detriment sometimes. But I think if we could take a leaf out of America's book in that respect and actually be more politically active, more pushing for
I don't know about the
change.
politically active. I mean, our voting rates are appalling. But I will say, my wish every day is aliens. If you watch Independence Day, all we really need is aliens to
bring us
come to
all
unite
together.
us all.
Yeah.
We need an outside threat that's not like people of color from somewhere else in the world.
Totally.
We need outside world. We need aliens to come and say, like, attack and not like kill too many people. That would be terrible.
That would be terrible.
We need like an outside uniting thing. And I wish that Australia could just imagine that aliens were attacking. just kind of imagine, like, what if America goes to shit? What if our debt crisis, like, this is what I talk about in the book. If you follow us and we go down, if we're the ship at the head of the armada and we're big enough that we don't tell the back of the armada we're going over a waterfall and we're too big to turn, you'll follow us right over. And if you're not being honest about what's ahead, and if you're not being honest about America's problems, you guys have to turn yourselves. And you have the capacity for that. You just kind of have to mobilize. And yes, you might be whinges. Is that the word you used?
Yeah, whiners, whinges. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but you do amazing things. You have a wonderful culture. It's a beautiful place.
It is.
And you have this special part of the world that, frankly, everything else could be going horrible everywhere else, and Australia and New Zealand could be safe. Like, you're a magical place. And I think if Australians could see that and band together and realize the magical island that they have, that in the upcoming years, they might be really glad it's an island. and do your own thing and protect yourselves and advance yourselves and what's best for Australia, I think you guys could band together and do awesome things. I wish that for America, but the reality is we're too big, we're too divided. It's 50 states. Like, if we had the people in the area that you did, maybe we'd have a shot, but I think it's too late for us, and we're heading over the waterfall. We had a good run for an empire. We had our 250 years, but I just don't see it going well for us, but it's not too late for Australia.
Not too late for Australia. I love it. I love it. All right. So look, I think we've probably covered this already in the longer form of the whole podcast so far. But I did say to you before the podcast that I'd love for you to give at the end some tips tips exactly to our listeners. And I mentioned to you that I think because you've got this amazing backstory of and clearly passion in the DOJ and regulation, doing things the right way. And on the other hand, you've got this new world of the Association for Women in Cryptocurrency and Inclusivity. So let's do two today, I think. So 3 tips for our listeners. Firstly, to get into crypto in a compliant and in a regulatory responsible kind of way. And on the other hand, also 3 tips for anyone in the blockchain world who would like to be more inclusive, and how to be more inclusive in everyone, not just women, not just men, everyone who's in the crypto space.
I think on the crypto industry side, we touched on them earlier, so I'll say them briefly. One is get good counsel, because if your crypto lawyer has been in it for a year or 2, I would question how old the shingle is. So please, there are some amazing attorneys in Australia who are OGs, who've been doing this for a long time.
Absolutely.
And trust me, the reason they charge what they charge is because they've earned it. And if you're an early startup, there's some amazing groups like the Australian DeFi Association. There's some other groups that will help you find counsel. I've talked to so many of the attorneys there who have said, I'd rather do pro bono work for somebody than them create, the next, DeFi atom bomb.
Yeah.
And so get good lawyers. The second thing would be, remember what you're doing, right? We talked about Pandora's box, but if you're moving value, that's the FI in DeFi, and people really need to remember that moving value is different than putting people in cars and moving them. So when people are like, I worked at Uber and so I can do DeFi, I'm like, these are different things, right? And so I think those are the big 3: good lawyers, remember what you're doing, and just maybe get some people who are really, really good at worst case scenario planning to sit in and help you brainstorm before you release the thing into the world, just to check and see, is there anything you're not seeing because you're too good to know what the worst have done, right?
Totally.
I think on the inclusion side, to the men that are watching this who think, that this is, like you said, like unconscious bias isn't a real thing. I don't have to explain this so much to girl dads, because they see this in a way all day, every day, right? Where somebody treats their daughter differently and says, oh, don't climb that tree, but the boys are kind of allowed to climb and are encouraged to take risks. Like, you really don't appreciate gender norms until you see the world that your little girl grows up in.
Sure.
That is clearly different than the world your little boy grows up in. So if you're a girl dad, or if you're just a male ally who thinks equality for men and women, like that would be great. Please contact me, get involved. We're working on our Unmantle Your Panel initiative, and we're spreading it beyond crypto, and we could use all the male allies that we can find. So if you're banking, payments, and you're like, I'm not really crypto, contact me, because we're spreading it, because we want to eliminate the mantle everywhere, because there's just no need, unless you're a panel that's talking about what a prostate exam feels like from firsthand experience. There's a woman qualified to talk about that. And so I think just kind of reaching out, and to your point earlier, I guess the second one would be, think about the places where you're having a dinner party, and try in those moments to be intentionally inclusive to other people, right? You're putting on a conference, you're putting on an event, you're putting together a business deal, you're creating a company, you're doing something, anything that's an opportunity. think about, what if I invited a woman? What if I invited a person of color? What if I invited somebody from an underrepresented group that I wouldn't otherwise invite? Let me just take a moment to pick up the phone and call somebody for a recommendation. So it's not a stranger. It's a good recommendation, solid qualified person. I just don't know them yet. Let me just broaden my network and include those who haven't been included.
Yep.
It does take a little bit more time and a little bit more work, but it's so worth it. And there's a lot of qualified, really qualified people out there who would benefit from that intentional inclusion. And then the last thing I'll say is to the women out there, if your heart's been broken by women's associations that were run by mean girls or queen bees, and you're looking for a place that has a strict no mean girls rule, then call us, because that is literally our first rule. And we're trying to build a different type of professional association that advocates for women, that's inclusive to men, that's inclusive to everyone, but that tries to fix a problem that we all have. And to your point earlier, you mentioned the party thing. We do have events, and that's a big part of what our members need. And I tell people, it's like we have a bunch of players playing a rigged game. And while they're playing it, right, like I can try to fix the rules, I can do Unman on Your Panel, I could work on industry initiatives to try to fix the rules of a rigged game. But the reality is that it's kind of miserable for the ones that are playing it. And sometimes they just want to get together and stitch and bitch. And that is totally okay. And so we have the events, and we have a lot of professional development events, because for the ones playing it, sadly, you still have to be Serena Williams to win. And I don't want that. But until we fix that, we're going to have to teach people to be a lot more like Serena, because I jokingly say that we'll have gender equality the day that an average white female can fail up at the same rate as an average white man. And until that happens, we just have to keep getting better on our end and trying to fix a broken system. And so if any of that interests you, reach out and contact me, because we'd love to have you involved.
Wonderful. Absolutely amazing. So that is, so for anyone that would like to get involved, Amanda will obviously put all of your contact details underneath both the YouTube video and the Spotify links.
Yes, my board will kill me. We're at womenincrypto.org. I always forget the webpage. We're at Wick Global on Instagram and X. And we're on, we have a public LinkedIn page that has all the information, so you can find us there. I'm always terrible about including that.
It's okay, but like I said, we'll put all of that underneath anyway in the description. So I always make sure that we can't forget any of that stuff. It's very important, and we want that. We want action to come out of the back of this. Anyone who is watching, you can clearly see Amanda's amazing, and the Association for Women in Cryptocurrency is an amazing initiative. So I'd love for anyone listening to sign up, contact Amanda, and we should definitely keep the conversation going, and hopefully we can get all of the things that we've talked about today. We can move forward. So thank you so much, Amanda, for taking the time. I really appreciate it. And
Jinx, you owe me a Coke when I'm in Melbourne.
God,
a flat white. You owe me a flat white.
A flat white. I will. I promise. And I will send you a photo of Henry for the back of your book.
I need a schnoodle.
Henry the Schnoodle. Absolutely. I also have Ruby the Groodle. Henry the Schnoodle and Ruby the Groodle.
You too. Thank you so much for having me. I love anything Oz, and I really appreciate the wonderful questions and just like your open heart and open mind to have the conversation. And it's just been an absolute joy and privilege. So thank you so much for having me.
No, you're most welcome. Thank you so much. And we will speak really soon. Thanks for watching. If you want to find out more about MezFi, go to www.mezfi.com. Follow us on X, YouTube, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. You can see our shorts there, and look forward to the next conversation, and see you then.